Practice test 11 just dropped. Let's go. We're starting with an easy one. We're just going to subtract 1 on both sides. And what are we going to get? 4x equals 32. We're done. We're moving on. The function k is defined by this. What is the value of k of x when x equals 2? Okay, I'll just replace this x with a 2. So now it's 2 cubed, which is 8, plus 110, which is 118. Let's keep going. What was the mean time in minutes for Robert to complete a task for this project? Well, they gave us 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 values. We just got to add them up and divide by 5. Why break out decimals when it's easy enough to do by hand? 7 plus 15 is 22. Then this is 18 plus 22 gets you to 40. But then we have to divide by the number of numbers that we just added up, which of course is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 40 divided by 5. You don't need decimals for that one. Moving on to 4. Let's read the actual question. Good strategy. If there are 6 1996 select grade Lincoln pennies in the collection. Okay, so 1996 select grade Lincoln pennies is our Y. So when they say there are 6 of those, they're telling us that Y equals 6. Then what are they asking for? They said how many 2009 premium log cabin pennies. Okay, well 2009 blah 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 is X. So basically, what is X when Y equals 6? So okay, just plug in the 6. Not too difficult. Now, sometimes it's a good idea to go to decimals even when you don't need it, just so you don't make a mistake in the calculation. So I'm just going to type in 8x plus 11 times 6 equals 170. And in case you didn't know, you can type in an equation and decimals will often solve it for you. Very, very common that it will. So now that we got 13, 0, that just means that the answer is 13. All right, let's move on. We got the graph of this function is shown. Which of the following best describes this function? Well, this is definitely not a straight line, so we would not call it linear. It's exponential, and it's increasing as it goes to the right. Always as you go to the right. This problem is what's known as a complete waste of time. So we're going to move on to number 7. And number 7, I already did a little bit of what they said over here. They said that we got 2 triangles that are congruent, and they said B and E are right angles. Then they told us that A is 27 degrees. So I can put A over here, say it's 27 degrees. And remember, it's supposed to be ABC. So now I can finally fill out ABC, and the other one's DEF. So that means that D is going to have to be 27 as well, by the way. And they're asking for angle F. Well, okay, I just got to do 90 minus 27, which is 63. So that's your answer right there. This one, they are saying which equation gives the number of players eliminated at the end of round R. I am purposely reading the question first. Okay, now let's read what's going on. There are 240 players in a tennis competition that includes 4 rounds of matches. Each player in the competition will play a match against another player in round 1. At the end of each round, a lot of times you got to skip ahead until you get to the important information. At the end of each round, the player who loses the match is eliminated, and the player who won the match advances to the next round to play a match against another winning player. Okay, so they want to know how many players are going to be eliminated at the end of round R. But let's get started with just pretending that R is 1. So we're at the end of round 1. But if we start with 240 players, then we're going to have 120 players versus 120 players. But whoever loses the match is going to get eliminated. So that means we're going to have 120 winners, but we're also going to have 120 losers. Those kids are going to get eliminated. And that's what they're asking for. They're asking for the number of players that got eliminated. So they want to know how many losers we got. Now, if it was R equals 1, then that means the number of players that got eliminated is supposed to come out to 120. So if R equals 1 in the first one, is this going to come out to 120? I don't think so. 15 times 1/2, definitely not 120. 15 times 2, definitely not. 240 times 1/2, yes, that comes out to 120. 240 times, no, definitely not. So without having to do any other rounds or think about the general pattern, we were able to get the answer by just plugging in a simple number. Key SAT strategy, obviously. This one is not even worth reading what's going on here, because if you just read the answer choices, you can tell that they're just asking you to solve for R. Well, what does that mean? We need to get rid of the fraction bar, which means division. How do you get rid of division? You multiply. So that means we're just going to multiply by 38. And if we scan the answer choices, we can see that in answer choice C, they just multiplied the other side by 38. Now, another thing that they could have done is distribute it, but they left it like that. So we're going to leave it like that. This one wants you to find the equation for line J. They told you that line J is parallel to line K. What do we know is true when two lines are parallel? It means their slopes is equal. So if I have a slope of 6 over here, then I have to make sure that I have a slope of 6 for the, oh my God, that's the only one that has a slope of 6. Even up till problem 10, we are still dealing with the easy problem. So let's move on to number 11. They said the length of one side of square M is 6 times the length of one side of square N. The area of square N is 49 square feet. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is just write down that this is supposed to be for N, and they're telling me that the area is 49, but what does that mean about the two sides? It means that each one has to be 7. So when they're talking about the length of one side of square N, well, we already know that that is 7. So when I reread this, they say the length of one side of square M, well, that is going to be 6 times 7. But what is 6 times 7? 6 times 7 is 42. So they're telling me that the length of one side of square M is 42, and then they want to know the area of square M. Well, clearly that's going to be a much bigger square where it's going to have 42 for each of its side lengths. Now, 42 times 42, well, that's kind of like 40 times 40, which is 1600. And clearly all of these are too small, so it must be A. When you're solving these and you're looking for just one real solution, you would start off by taking the square root. That'll cancel out the square. But then you would also always want to put your plus or minus. Now, when I'm doing this on the second answer choice, I'm not going to get one real solution. I'm going to get 0 because it's the square root of a negative number. And when I'm looking at C, am I going to get one real solution? Well, no, because of the plus or minus. That actually means that one time you would have the square root of 45, but one time you would have the negative of that. And that same problem is going to happen in D as well. Only when you have plus or minus 0 does that result in just one solution, because plus or minus 0 means the same thing as 0 and negative 0, and both of those are the same thing. So just one real solution whenever you have a 0 underneath a square root. If you like renting buses, you're going to love this problem. They are charging you $9.50 for the first 3 hours. So $9.50 for the first 3 hours, but then you're going to get charged an additional $50 per hour for each hour after the first 3 hours. So I can already tell you that that's going to be like 50 times the number of additional hours. So then they're telling us that the total cost is $11.50. So just by doing a little bit of basic setup, I can already tell that it's not going to be A or B. It's got to be $9.50. That's set in stone, plus 50 times a certain amount of additional hours. But if you think about how many additional hours there will be, if you're renting it for T hours, then there's going to be T minus 3. Think about an example. Imagine if T was equal to 4, then how many additional hours would there be? Well, it would only be 4 minus 3. It wouldn't actually be 4 additional hours. It would only be 1 additional hour. So you wouldn't want to leave it as $9.50 plus 50 times T. It's actually T minus 3 if T is supposed to be all the hours. So there we go. We are using C. If you just skip to the very end here, they're asking you what is the value of B, but they're also telling you that we're using mx plus b. Now, b is always the y-intercept, and the y-intercept always means that the x is 0. That's really the key to the problem. The key to the problem is that x must be 0. Now, if we look at our table, they didn't give us the value when x is 0, did they? But we can easily pick up on the pattern here, is that each time I move up, I just have to add 4. So this is kind of a problem for babies. Here they're saying that the population of the town of Smithville doubled every 75 years from 1659 to 1959. They were keeping some good records. The population of this town was 240 grand in 1959. What was the population in 1659? So we have at 1659, that is what they're asking about. But in 1959, they're telling us that it's 240 grand. But they're telling us that the population doubled every 75 years. But how many doublings would we have? Well, how many chunks of 75 are found between 1659 and 19? Well, that's an extra 300 years. So how many 75s fit inside of 300? Well, you could throw that in decimals if you want, but the answer is 4. One way to calculate that by hand is just simply to realize 75 times 2 is 150. And then if I multiply that by 2, I would get to 300. So anyway, answer is 4. That's how many doublings I will have. So what that means is I should be doubling whatever it was in 1659, which means I'm multiplying by 2. But how many times am I going to do that? 4 times. What's that going to come out to? 240 grand. Now, what is 2 to the 4, by the way? It's actually just the same thing as 16. So all I have to do here is just do 240 grand divided by 16, and that'll get me the population in 1659. Now, if you want to run to decimals, that's fine. If you want to be super cool, what you could do is divide 24 by 16. Each of those can be divided by 8. That'll get you 3. This will get you 2. So now I end up getting 30,000 divided by 2, which is 15,000. So 15,000, that's what the population used to be. You can multiply it by 16 and you'll find out it does come out to 240. Here they're asking us for the slope of the line of best fit. So I just need to be staring at the line of best fit, which is the actual line. Don't use the points, use the actual line. But then they want the slope of that line. So what I'll do is I'll just estimate it because they said it's closest to. And I'm noticing over here I've got a point that's kind of like 10, 9. And over here, this is kind of like 0, 3. So then all I got to do is 9 minus 3 over 10 minus 0. That's 6 over 10, which is 0.6. And we're done. 17 wants you to match up the 3 points that they gave you with the correct equation. Now, the easiest way to do this one is by making sure that when you plug in any of your points, let's say 32, 8, you end up getting it to work on the equation. But if I look at C and D, I see that 32 is showing up in each of those. And if I were to plug in the 32 for X into this one, then 32 minus 32 would be 0. And then I would have something times 0, which is 0, plus 32. So that would come out to 32. But I don't want it to come out to 32. I want it to come out to 8. So that one's actually definitely not my answer based upon what we just said. So now if I go to the last one and I plug in 32 there, well, again, same logic. This is going to come out to 0 minus 32. But it's not supposed to come out to minus 32. It's supposed to come out to 8. So that one's also not correct. Now, if I try the same logic using this point right here, and I plug in 30 for X, then when I do that, this is all going to come out to 0 plus, but it's not supposed to come out to 4. It's supposed to come out to negative 8. So that one's not correct either. And then if you go here and you plug in the 30, what's it coming out to? Negative 8. That's exactly what I wanted it to come out to. So that means that B is the correct answer. For this one, you got to know the equation of a circle. And the equation of a circle is always x minus h squared plus y minus k squared equals r squared, where the h and the k are the x and y coordinates of the center. So what that means is that h should be 19, and looks like that's happening in A. And k should be 18. That's also happening in A. Now, not only is it happening in A, it's actually happening in all of them, right? Okay, so what? But now they're saying that the radius is 9k. So that means where I see r, I'm supposed to put 9k. But then it still has to be squared. Now, what does that mean? That means that I'm going to have 9 squared, but I'm also going to have k squared. What is 9 squared? It's 81. So that means that this is supposed to come out to 81k squared. Now this one's only coming out to 81k. Not cool. This is the only one that's doing 81k squared. Therefore, we're done. We got one for the Star Wars fans here. They're saying based on the graph, which of the following is closest to the estimated mass in kilograms of each N-type star in this cluster. Okay, so let's go back and read. It says a certain open star cluster contains M-type stars and K type stars. The K standing for kill type stars, kind of like the Death Star. The estimated total mass of M type and K type stars in this cluster is 127 whatevers. The graph shown models the possible number of combinations of X and Y. Well, I can see over here, yeah, sure, I could call it X and Y, but I could also call it M and K. But what they want to know is what's the estimated mass of each M type star. The key to this problem is realizing the coordinates over here are approximately 160, 0. Now, that is important because it means that you would have 160 M, but then 0 of the K. So that means in that case, that would be the particular combination where you're only dealing with M-type stars. So that would take up the total mass. So if the total mass is 127, we just want to divide that by 160 to figure out what each one is. And it's clearly not going to come out to either one of these, but if you type it in, you will get about 800. So yeah, we're going with A then. We're going to start by reading the actual question here. They want to know the length of QS. I'm just going to call that X. And I can see that they're talking about cosine and sine here. But not only that, they're always talking about angle Q. So what that means is I'm just going to circle angle Q. And I got to figure out how I should label the 18. Now, the 18, is that the opposite, the adjacent, or the hypotenuse? It is the opposite because I'm going right through the triangle. And the X, well, what's that? That is the hypotenuse. And according to the Native American that discovered America, Sokotoa, we want to be dealing with opposite and hypotenuse. We're going to be dealing with So we're going to have sine of Q equals opposite over hypotenuse. So it's going to be 18, our opposite, over the X, which is our hypotenuse. Then we can multiply both sides here by X. That'll cancel this out. And then we just have to divide both sides by sine of Q. And that'll get us to here. For this problem, we need a strategy. That strategy is to first focus on what they're actually asking for. They're asking for the value of A. Where do I see A? I see it right here inside of this equation. So the equation is often the most important thing that you're going to find inside of a word problem. Okay, so we've got this equation, but they're asking for the value of A. And there's a lot of stuff going on here. It's a little bit hard to understand exactly what's going on there. But before we dive into it, let's just stare at this equation real quick. It looks kind of like m times x minus x1. And then there's the plus 433. What's the equation that looks like m times x minus x1? It's y minus y1. So if I want to manipulate this equation that they gave me so it looks more like that one that I'm used to, I could do it by subtracting 433 from both sides. If I do that, the equation would now become f of x minus 433. And okay, the 433, maybe that's my y1 when my x1 is A. Okay, but where do I see the 433 show up in the problem? It says 433 BHP. And in fact, if you look at the beginning of the problem, it says F is measured in bhp. And it also says that there's another type of unit. And down here it says X is the engine speed in RPM. But that part where it says the 433, it says according to this function, the car's predicted power is 433 bhp at an engine speed of 3331 RPM. Huh. Okay, so it's kind of like they're just giving me a point there. And the point that they're giving me, it's got to be in the form x comma y, but the x in this case would be the 3331 and the y is 433. But remember what they were asking us for? They were asking us for a. But wait a second, that a is actually the same thing as x1. And what we just found is that our y1 is 433. So what does that mean? That means that the x is just the 3331. That's it. That's all you really need to do for this problem. Now, of course, they gave you a little bit of extra info here that we didn't end up using, but all we really needed to do was a clever use of the y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1 formula. All right, this one's extremely easy to do on Desmos, but if you want it to be even faster in Desmos, you should know that you're just going to set each of these pieces equal to 0. And this is not something you should actually be writing down, but you should just know that when you solve something that has an exponent of 3, you're going to want to solve using a cube root. But when you do a cube root, you do not do the plus or minus thing. That is not a thing for odd exponents. So when you do get an answer for that, you're just going to get one answer. But when we do the same kind of thing for the next one, well, are we only going to get one answer? Well, no, because when you take any even root, you do put the plus or minus. So for that, you're going to end up with 2 more answers. And 1 plus 2, you could do that on Desmos if you want. If you're one of those people that overuses Desmos, and obviously we didn't really have to use it that much for this module, but maybe in the next section. Module 2 dropping soon. In the meantime, go to boremastertutor.com to get your 800.